Hi everyone, this is Dr. Mike, host of the free iTunes podcast, Psychiatric Secrets Revealed with Dr. Mike. But that's not why I'm here today. This is another Saving Savvy episode, actually a Photography 101 episode. And in this episode, we're going to talk about how to find good used lenses for your camera. So why buy a used lens? Well, basically they're much, much cheaper and you can still get excellent glass. And camera lenses are very precision instruments, and so they can really last and work perfectly well for decades. So you're not really compromising on image quality. So because this is a Photography 101 episode, we're going to talk about mounts and all sorts of other stuff. So here is a used lens that I picked up, and where the lens mates to the camera, this is called the mount. And those mounts are specific to the particular brand of camera. So this is a Nikon camera, and it uses what's called an F mount for its DSLRs. If you had a Pentax camera, that would use a K mount. If you had a Canon camera, I think that's an EF mount. A Sony camera for an SLT is called an alpha mount. For their NEX or now like Alpha 6000 cameras, that's called an E mount. So you have to have the right type of mount. It has the right electronic connections on it and the right grooves and little protrusions if you want to mount it to your camera. So understand that. You also have to know your camera. So cameras have different capabilities, and sometimes depending within the same brand name. So for instance, if you have a Nikon camera, their consumer level cameras do not have a built-in focusing motor in them. So that's the 3000 series or the 5000 series cameras, no focusing motor. There are tons of lenses nowadays that have focusing motors built into them, so no problem. But if you buy an older lens like this 60 millimeter prime lens that I have here, this requires an external focusing motor in the camera, and so if you put this on your consumer level Nikon, you're going to definitely have to do manual focusing, which you may not want to do all the time. However, if you have a D7000 series like a 7200 or a full frame camera, there's a motor built into that camera body, and it's going to mate with this screw head right here, and it's going to turn and focus the lens, and you'll be just fine. So you need to know that. Now, all compatible Canon lenses, I think, have built-in focusing motors in them because their lens system, I think, was the new system was developed in the late 1980s, so they have focusing motors in them. If you're going with a Sony camera, pretty much all Sony SLT cameras, I think, have focusing motors, as do Pentax cameras. So you can go with much older lenses and still get great results. You'll also have to understand that certain camera brands have different capabilities as far as image stabilization. So if you're going with a Sony camera or a Pentax camera, that camera body itself has the image stabilization. So if you slap on a lens from even 20, 30 years ago, if it's compatible, you're getting image stabilization. Nikons and Canons do not have image stabilization built into them. And so if you use an older lens like this on even a pro level Nikon, yes, you're going to get focusing, but you're not going to get image stabilization. Is that a disaster? Not really at all, because this particular lens is a 60 millimeter. That means that I should shoot at 1/60th of a second or faster to get a steady shot. And if I have to go slower than that, I could always use a tripod or a monopod or do something else to stabilize the image. So these are still very usable images. They're just slightly less convenient than a lens that has image stabilization built into it. Okay, so the other thing that you need to know about is the size of the sensor. This is not going to make any difference if you're talking about a smaller sensor like a 1-inch sensor or a micro four thirds sensor, because when it comes to micro four thirds sensors, all lenses are compatible if they're micro four thirds lenses among all brands. And if you're talking about a 1-inch sensor, those are pretty limited. So obviously if you get like a Nikon 1 series camera, then you're going to want to buy a Nikon 1 series lens. All is good. These are modern cameras with modern size sensors. But if you go with a DSLR, it's a little bit different because most DSLRs that most of us use have what's called an APS-C size sensor. But if you want a professional level camera, that's going to have a bigger full frame sensor. And that sensor called a full frame sensor is the size of a 35 millimeter piece of film. So to reduce costs, manufacturers like Nikon and third-party companies and Canon for their cameras and everything, they will make, and probably, well, Pentax I don't think makes a full frame camera, but they will make lenses that have smaller lenses on them because that's less expensive, but the lens still is big enough to have a light circle on the APS-C size sensor. However, if you put one of those smaller lens circles on your full frame camera, you're either going to get vignetting, which is blackening around the edges because you're not covering that whole um, sensor with light, or the sensor or the camera might not even accept the lens. You can't even use it. Or in the case of Nikon, you're going to auto crop down and you will be able to use the lens, but it's going to be less megapixels. So the bottom line is, if you have an APS-C size sensor, you can use a lens that's designed for APS-C or full frame because it has a big circle of light. If you're using a full frame camera, then you're best off going with a lens that has a full frame field of light on the sensor. And the good news is that most older lenses, because they were designed for 35 millimeter film, actually do that just fine. So they'll work with full frame or they'll work with APS-C. It's just some of the newer lenses where you have to be careful to make sure what the lens is. And if you're unsure what lenses are compatible with your particular camera, just type in Google or a search engine, what lenses are compatible with a D3200 or a D5300 or a D7200 or whatever the comparable names would be for like a Canon or a Sony or a Pentax camera. And someone has created a list and you can just look at that list. Now, the other thing that you need to know, and I think my son is mowing the grass, so I apologize for that. The other thing that you need to kind of be aware of is, so we've talked about image stabilization, we've talked about focusing motors, is the lens good or not? And here again, if you see a lens, all manufacturers have created awesome lenses and they've created dogs. So just Google that and you'll get a review and it'll tell you if it's a good lens. So let's say you've decided on buying a particular lens. Where do you buy it? Well, I'm going to give you the best, next best, next best. So the best place to buy a lens is in person, maybe at a camera shop, a reliable camera shop, where you can bring your camera in, check everything out, see how the lens works on your camera, see that it mates properly and smoothly, and then even look at some images on, let's say you bring a laptop, on your laptop to see if there's any imperfections or bad focusing and that sort of a thing. Now that's pretty unusual to do. So what's the next best thing? Well, the next best thing would be to use a really reliable company like B&H or Adorama. Those companies, and there's other ones too, but they want your return business. They certainly have got my return business, and so they're very, very accurate. Now they will sell imperfect lenses, but they'll tell you that. So you want a lens that's like Mint or Excellent Plus or something like that, and you want to read the description carefully. And if there's any sign in there that, let's say maybe it's a stiff ring or mechanical sound when focusing or anything that implies that things are not quite right, move on to the next lens. You don't want to waste your money. The third place to look is eBay. And again, it's a little less safe, but not terribly unsafe. Here you want to look for a good rating from the seller. But remember, if you're buying something from Japan, which is where a lot of these lenses come from, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to send the lens back to Japan, so you do take a little bit of risk. Now, I will say that I've never got totally stung doing that, but I've gotten just slightly stung, and I'll tell you how that happened in just a minute. So let's say whatever you do, whether it's pictures that you're looking at or descriptions or whatever you can do, you want to examine things very carefully. So the first thing you want to do is just look at the lens, the overall shape of the lens. Now this lens looks like it's brand new to me, right? This is an old lens, but there's no marks on it whatsoever. It's absolutely beautiful. And so this lens would be, I would think, in excellent condition. If you had a few minor scratches on it, even some minor scratches on the element, just very light scratches, don't worry about it. If you had a little bit of dust in the lens, don't worry about it. That's normal. Lenses get dust. They're complicated devices. Things that I would be concerned about, one thing is called haze. So haze is defined typically as the lubricants within the lens get heated up and they degrade and they sublimate. They go directly from a solid to a gas and they coat the lens. And haze, some people say haze is okay, but I also read a lot of reports that say haze can really mess up your contrast and blunt your colors. It probably depends on the kind of haze. But if I saw the word haze, I would not probably buy that lens. Some people would though. But one thing that I would absolutely not buy is if it said fungus, even little fungus, light fungus, tiny bit of fungus, because fungus is a living organism that the spores have gotten into the lens and they're growing. And you can't get rid of it unless it's professionally cleaned. And if you have a lot of fungus, it etches the glass and ruins the lens, and you just have to throw it out. And don't forget, even though you might see just a little bit of fungus, that fungus is producing literally millions of fungal spores, mold spores, and if you put that lens with your other lenses, you're going to be potentially contaminating all of them. So if it says fungus, do not buy. The other thing that if you are lucky enough to actually look at a lens in person is to use a little flashlight and shine it through the lens and look at all different angles. And you can see this lens looks pretty good, right? I don't see much in there. Looks pretty darn good. Little dust in there. Yeah, that's what I see, a bit of dust, but it looks pretty good. So you can do that too, and look at it from the other end too if you choose to, and see if you can see any fungus or haze or other things that would damage the quality of the lens. Check the screws on the back. Do they look like they've been tampered with, like someone was trying to fix the lens themselves? If so, don't buy it, even if you see that in a picture. If the person says that the lens is difficult to focus or the rings are tight, or if the switches are loose or anything that suggests misuse, overuse, don't buy the lens. There are plenty of people, like the guy that sold me this lens here, where the lens is perfect and nothing to worry about. Here's another lens. So this one here is a awesome lens. This is a 35 to 70 f2.8. This was the premier lens when it came out. It's a push-pull lens, right? That's how you go from 35, or actually this is 35 and back to 70. However, with a lens like this, it's like a bellow, you're going to get some dust in there. But I would not buy it if it had haze or fungus. So check it out visually, check it out internally, check it out on your camera. If you can get a return warranty on it, if they'll give you that. And I think in most cases you're going to be okay. So I thought I would tell you two instances where I had maybe not quite perfect returns on my investment. Again, not too bad. I did buy one lens very inexpensively that it said the lens was clear. And when I did look at it at home, it had a tiny little, I don't even know what it was. It looked like a tiny little dot of gravy on the inside. So it wasn't fungus, it wasn't haze, it wasn't dust. I don't know what it was. It didn't really affect image quality, but it was slightly misrepresented. You know, the other interesting thing is I bought a very cheap 50 millimeter old Nikon lens, and the lens came exactly as described to me. But the weird thing was that the seller, it came actually wrapped in like dinner napkins, like old paper dinner, not used, but paper dinner napkins, and the seller did not include the rear cap or the front cap. Now that totally was awful, because then even though the caps are relatively cheap, I had to go out and buy them. I couldn't use the lens. Usually you have to buy several caps in a row. Even if you buy like a third-party lens, you have to wait for them to come. And so that was definitely a seller that I would not use again. And I don't know why he had to have the front and rear cap on a lens and not just throw that in the deal. So those are only the two times that I've actually been slightly stung. Not too bad, really. And still, I had usable lenses. So those are my tips on what to do and how to buy a great lens for very little money. If you get some time, please give my podcast a listen. It's called Psychiatric Secrets Revealed with Dr. Mike. It's on iTunes and other podcatching sites. If you like this video, I would really appreciate it if you give me a thumbs up. If you like my series of videos, which are a complete mix of different things, please subscribe. And as always, have an awesome day. Bye.